Digital.
And welcome to Sex 101. Sex 101 is created to empower our sexes and relationships. Another week, another amazing sex topics. Not the sex topics, anyways, but what does it mean to be a man? Recovering ancient wisdom on masculine identity.
Yes, so let's ask who everyone else is asking these days. ChatGPT has answered the question of masculinity. So it says, according to ChatGPT, it begins with the biological traits that differentiate male from female to his expression, usually shaped by social, cultural, and historical expectations. But the question of what does it mean to be a man has now become one of the most contested and anxiety producing questions of our time. Young men scroll through social media encountering contradictory messages. Traditional masculinity is toxic, but also men should be strong providers. Emotions are weakness, but also vulnerability is strength. Be a leader, but also check your privilege. A recent essay titled Be a Man captures this confusion perfectly, acknowledging that masculinity means different things to different people, ultimately landing on functionality as the core of manhood while warning against unbridled masculinity that becomes destructive. It's a thoughtful piece that reflects our cultural moment, but it also reveals how impoverished our contemporary discourse has become. What if the ancient wisdom traditions, particularly the Judeo Christian tradition, offers us something far more robust, integrated, and ultimately liberating than our modern confusion? What if the path forward isn't through inventing new definitions of masculinity, but through recovering old ones that understood manhood not as mere functionality or biological determinism, but as a calling to embody specific virtues that reflect the divine image?
Reflect the divine image. Yes, to be a man, or the be a man article argues the masculinity should be understood through functionality. The men are valued based on how much they contribute to society, and the more practically useful you are, the more respect you receive. On the surface, this seems practical and even accurate. Don't men need to be productive, capable, and contributing members of society? What's wrong with defining masculinity through functionality, Mr. Mike?
This is where contemporary thinking reveals how far we've drifted from ancient wisdom, and it's causing immense damage to men. The Be a Man article itself acknowledges the problem. The value placed on men is in conjunction with how much they contribute to society, but then doubles down on it rather than challenging it. This is fundamentally contrary to both Jewish and Christian anthropology, which insists that human worth is intrinsic, not earned through productivity. Let's start with the foundational text. Genesis 1:27 declares, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them." Notice what grounds human dignity here. Not functionality, not productivity, not social contribution, but the simple fact of bearing God's image. The Hebrew concept of created in God's image means that every person possesses infinite, non negotiable worth that exists before and independent of their accomplishments. The Jewish tradition developed this understanding with remarkable sophistication. The Mishnah teaches, therefore, Adam was created alone to teach you that whoever destroys a single soul is considered as if he's destroyed an entire world, and whoever saves a single soul is considered as if he saved an entire world. Each person, male or female, functional or disabled, productive or dependent, contains infinite worth. To define a man's value by his functionality is to commit what Martin Buber called the fundamental error of treating persons as its rather than thous, reducing subjects to objects, persons to instruments. Early Christian writers understood this profoundly. St. Gregory of Nyssa, writing in the 4th century, argued that the image of God in humanity means we possess inherent dignity that never can be lost or diminished, regardless of our circumstances. In his work on the making of man, Gregory explicitly rejected the idea that human worth derives from our capacities or contributions. He wrote that even when human beings fall into sin, suffer disability, or lose their faculties, the divine image remains indelible and glorious. This matters desperately for men today. When we define masculinity through functionality, we create what psychologists call contingent self worth, the sense that you are only as valuable as your last achievement, your current paycheck, your ability to provide. Dr. William Pollack's research on male psychology reveals that this functional definition of manhood creates what he calls the boy code, a set of impossible standards that produce chronic anxiety, emotional suppression, and vulnerability to depression and suicide. Men internalize the message: if you fail to perform, you have no worth. The Be a Man article captures this tragedy perfectly when it says, a man with nothing to look forward to is usually the most miserable type. But why? If a man's worth is intrinsically grounded in bearing God's image, then even a man without external achievements retains infinite dignity and purpose. The fact that we find a non functional man miserable reveals how deeply we've internalized a false anthropology that the biblical tradition explicitly rejects. Consider Jesus' teaching in Matthew 6:26. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or stow away from barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Jesus is directly challenging a functionality based understanding of work. The birds don't contribute to society, don't build civilizations, don't provide, and yet they are valued and cared for by God. How much more, Jesus says, are human beings valuable, not for what they do, but for who they are? The Apostle Paul reinforces this in his theology of grace. In Ephesians 2 8 and 9, he writes, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. If our very salvation, our ultimate standing before God, doesn't depend on our functionality or works, how can we possibly ground masculine worth in productivity and social contribution? There's a deep irony here. The functionality model claims to honor men by recognizing their contributions, but it actually enslaves them to endless performance anxiety. The ancient Christian concept of imago Dei liberates men by establishing their worth as a gift, not an achievement. This doesn't mean men shouldn't work, contribute, or develop their capacities, but it reorders the why. You don't work to earn your worth, you work as an expression of worth you already possess. St. Augustine understood this in his distinction between use and enjoyment. We use tools and things to accomplish purposes, but we enjoy persons as ends in themselves. When we define men by functionality, we reduce them to tools, things to be used. Biblical anthropology insists men are to be enjoyed, valued, and loved as irreducible persons who reflect divine glory. Contemporary research validates this ancient wisdom. Dr. Brene Brown's work on shame reveals that men's primary shame trigger is being perceived as weak or inadequate, as not measuring up to functional standards. This shame drives addictions, workaholism, emotional disconnection, and violence. The antidote isn't better functionality, but understanding what Brown calls wholehearted living, accepting your inherent worthiness independent of achievement. The Jewish concept of Shabbat or Sabbath offers a powerful corrective to functionality based manhood. One day a week, Jewish tradition commands complete rest, no work, no productivity, no functionality. Why? Because the Sabbath is a weekly reminder that your worth isn't tied to your output. You are valuable simply for existing, for bearing God's image, for being called very good in the Genesis creation account. A masculinity grounded in functionality can never rest. A masculinity grounded in imago Dei can cease striving and simply be. The ancient Jewish and Christian understanding of being created in God's image fundamentally challenges the functionality model of masculinity, establishing that a man's worth is intrinsic and indelible rather than contingent on productivity. In conclusion, liberating men from the performance anxiety and chronic shame that contemporary culture's utilitarian view of manhood inevitably produces.
And Mr. Meg, tell us it's okay. So, if functionality is not the right framework, what is? The Be a Man article lists qualities like taking responsibility, being disciplined, controlling desires, putting others first, courage, protection, assertiveness, and strength. These sounds like good things. Are these the virtues that ancient wisdom would fame for man?
Here's where we need to be very careful because the article is simultaneously right and profoundly wrong. Yes, these qualities matter, but notice what's missing from the list: wisdom, justice, mercy, humility, gentleness, and love. The Be a Man article has cherry picked certain virtues that fit a modern stereotype of masculinity while ignoring others that ancient wisdom considered equally or more essential. This selective emphasis creates a distorted and ultimately dangerous form of manhood. Let's look at what the wisdom literature actually emphasizes. The book of Proverbs, the central biblical text on practical wisdom, repeatedly elevates qualities the modern world often codes as feminine. Proverbs 11:2 says, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." Proverbs 15:1 teaches, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Proverbs 16:32 declares, "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." Notice what's being valued here: humility over pride, gentleness over harshness, patience over warrior prowess, self-control over conquest. These are the qualities that wisdom literature says make a man truly strong, not the stereotypical masculine traits of dominance, aggression, and stoicism that our culture often celebrates. The Jewish concept is instructive here. Often translated as strength or might in the rabbinic tradition, came to mean something quite different from physical power. The Talmud records this remarkable teaching: "Who is mighty? He who conquers his evil inclination." True strength, according to Jewish wisdom, is self mastery, particularly the mastery of anger, pride, and selfish desire. The mightiest man isn't the one who can overpower others, but the one who can govern himself. Early Christian writers developed this understanding with great sophistication. The Cappadocian father, St. Basil the Great, in his work On Humility, argued that humility is the foundational virtue that makes all other virtues possible. Without humility, courage becomes recklessness, strength becomes oppression, and assertiveness becomes domination. Basil wrote, "The beginning of pride is not knowing the Lord, it is the heart's departure from its maker." St. John Chrysostom, the 4th century Archbishop of Constantinople, preached extensively on what constitutes true manhood. In his homilies on the Gospel of Matthew, Chrysostom insisted that the virtues Jesus embodied and taught, meekness, mercy, purity of heart, peacemaking, are not contrary to masculinity, but constitute its highest expression. He wrote, "Nothing is so strong as gentleness, nothing so gentle as real strength." This is a radically different vision than the Be a Man article presents. Chrysostom would challenge the notion that a man controls his desires for the greatest good by asking, what about the desire for dominance, the desire to be right, the desire to win at all costs? The article's list of masculine virtues focuses almost exclusively on outward strength and action while giving minimal attention to the interior virtues of character formation that ancient wisdom considered paramount. Let's look at Jesus himself, the one the Be a Man article briefly references when noting that the greatest man to ever live wept. But the article treats this as an exception, a brief acknowledgement that emotions are acceptable before returning to its functionality framework. Ancient Christian thought would see this as a fundamentally backwards. Jesus isn't a strong, functional man who occasionally showed emotion. He's the full revelation of true humanity, including true manhood, which includes profound emotional depth, vulnerability, and what the Gospels repeatedly call his visceral, gut level compassion. Consider the portrait of Jesus in the Gospels. Yes, he displayed courage and assertiveness, clearing the temple, confronting religious authorities, and facing crucifixion without recanting. But the Gospels give equal or greater emphasis to other qualities: his compassion for the sick and marginalized, his gentleness with children, his patience with confused disciples, his willingness to serve by washing feet, his capacity for friendship and intimacy, and his profound emotional life that included weeping, anger, distress, and joy. The early church recognized Jesus as the Imago Dei, fully realized, the perfect human, which means the perfect man. If we want to know what true masculinity looks like, we look at Christ, and what we find is a complex integration of strength and tenderness, courage and compassion, assertiveness and humility, protection and nurture. St. Augustine developed this in his theology of virtue. In The City of God, Augustine argued that the classical pagan virtues, courage, temperance, justice, prudence, are only genuine virtues when ordered by love. Courage without love becomes brutality. Strength without love becomes tyranny. Assertiveness without love becomes domination. The Be a Man article lists virtues of action and strength, but doesn't sufficiently ground them in love, which Augustine would say makes them potentially dangerous rather than truly virtuous. The medieval synthesis, particularly in Thomas Aquinas, emphasized what were called the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, as superior to and necessary for the proper functioning of all other virtues. A man might possess all the qualities the article lists: responsibility, discipline, courage, strength, but without faith, hope, and love ordering these capacities, they can easily become instruments of harm rather than flourishing. Contemporary psychological research supports this ancient wisdom. Dr. Ronald Levant's research on the normative male, the culturally induced inability of men to identify and express emotions, shows that men who conform to traditional masculinity norms, emotional restriction, dominance, aggression, have poorer physical health, more troubled relationships, and higher rates of substance abuse and violence. In contrast, men who develop emotional intelligence, empathy, and relational capacity, qualities the ancient wisdom tradition considered essential masculine virtues, demonstrate better mental health, stronger relationships, and greater life satisfaction. Dr. Joseph Pleck's research on gender role strain reveals that rigid adherence to masculine stereotypes creates psychological distress, particularly when men face situations that require qualities outside the narrow masculine script, like nurturing children, processing grief, asking for help, or admitting uncertainty. The ancient wisdom tradition's more expansive vision of masculine virtue equips men for the full range of human experience rather than constraining them to a limited repertoire of responses. While contemporary definitions of masculinity often emphasize action oriented virtues like strength, virtue, and assertiveness, the ancient Jewish and Christian wisdom traditions insisted on a more comprehensive virtue framework that equally prioritizes humility, gentleness, compassion, and love, qualities exemplified perfectly in Jesus Christ, whose life reveals that true masculine strength is inseparable from tenderness. In conclusion, Jesus' genuine courage requires vulnerability, and that authentic authority flows from service rather than domination.
Vulnerability indeed. And Mr. Meg, the Be a Man article says that a man is always willing to make any sacrifice to protect those he loves, and warns that when men are not taught properly, crimes like rape become rampant since the boy child becomes a predator rather than protector. This protector role seems central to how the article understands masculinity. Is this biblical? Should men see themselves primarily as protectors?
This is where the article gets something important right, but then doesn't go deep enough into what protection actually means in the biblical tradition. Yes, protection is part of masculine calling, but ancient wisdom radically redefines what protection looks like and warns against the very distortions the article itself identifies. Let's start with the biblical vision of masculine leadership, which is consistently framed as servant leadership, a concept that sounds like an oxymoron to modern ears but was revolutionary in the ancient world. In Mark 10:42 to 45, Jesus explicitly contrasts worldly models of masculine authority with kingdom leadership. You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become part great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. This teaching fundamentally redefines protection. In the pagan Roman world of Jesus' day, Masculine strength meant the power to dominate, to command, to take what you wanted. The Roman paterfamilias, male head of household, had absolute power, including power of life and death over his wife, children, and slaves. This was protection through dominance, security through superior force. Jesus inverts this entirely. True masculine strength, he insists, is a strength to serve, to sacrifice, to lay down your life, not to assert power over others. The Greek word Jesus uses for servant is a word which means and serves at the table, one who serves others and meets others' needs. This is a model of masculine protection, not standing over those you love with superior power, but standing alongside them, willing to sacrifice your own interests for their flourishing. The early church took this so seriously. St. John Chrysostom, in his homily on Ephesians 5, the passage about husbands and wives, makes a remarkable statement. He tells husbands that even if their wife is disobedient, rude, or difficult, the husband's calling remains unchanged. Show her that you bear no malice and do all things as reckoning that you will please God. He continues, even if you see her looking down upon you and disdaining you and treating you with contempt, by your thoughtfulness, win her over. Nothing is more powerful than this chain, especially for husband and wife. Notice what Chrysostom is doing. He's defining masculine strength not as the power to compel obedience or demand respect, but as the emotional and spiritual strength to love consistently even when unrequited, to serve even when unappreciated. This is a far more demanding vision of masculine protection than physical defense. The Jewish tradition offers complementary wisdom through the concept often translated as charity, but more accurately meaning justice or righteousness. The Torah repeatedly commands protection of the vulnerable, widows, orphans, foreigners, the poor. But this protection isn't framed as masculine dominance over the weak. It's framed as justice, as the proper ordering of society where those in power use it to ensure the flourishing of those without. The prophetic tradition develops this extensively. Micah 6:8 defines what God requires: to love justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. And Isaiah commands, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Notice the qualities involved: justice, mercy, humility, and advocacy. This is protection, yes, but it looks very different from the warrior protector stereotype. Here's where the Be a Man article's warning about predators versus protectors becomes crucial. The articles write that men can become predators when masculinity goes wrong, but it doesn't adequately explain why this happens or how to prevent it. Ancient wisdom provides the answer. Men become predators when they embrace power without virtue, strength without constraint, desire without self governance. St. Augustine's concept of the lust for domination is essential here. Augustine argued that fallen masculinity expresses itself primarily as the desire to dominate, control, and conquer others. This is the root of predatory behavior, not excess masculinity, but disordered masculinity that seeks power for its own sake rather than the service of others. The cure isn't less masculine strength, but properly ordered masculine strength, what Augustine calls love instead of selfish desire. The strong man uses his strength in the service of the vulnerable, not in the exploitation of them. The powerful man uses his power to create space for others to flourish, not to aggrandize himself. St. Gregory the Great, writing in the 6th century with his pastoral care, describes the proper use of authority as a kind of weight bearing. Those in friendship carry the burdens of those they serve. He writes, it is necessary that those who are in charge should always have in their estimation not the power of their rank, but the equality of their nature. In conclusion, protection means burden bearing, not privilege taking.
A privilege taking indeed. And Mr. Mac, to wrap up, how does contemporary research confirm the biblical model?
Contemporary research validates this servant leadership model. Dr. John Gottman's studies on successful marriages reveal that relationships thrive when men show what he calls accepting influence, the willingness to listen to their partner's perspective, share power, and collaborate on decisions. The failed marriages in Gottman's research consistently involve what he calls the harsh startup and flooding, patterns where men use superior physical presence, loud voices, or intimidation to dominate conversations. This is protection perverted into predation. Dr. Jackson Katz's work on violence prevention identifies the key factor in preventing men from becoming perpetrators, teaching men that masculine strength means standing against violence, harassment, and abuse, even when committed by other men. Katz argues that the bystander approach fails when we don't give men a positive masculine identity tied to the protection of the vulnerable. Ancient wisdom would agree. Men are protectors, but protection means confronting injustice wherever it appears, including among your own peer group. The biblical model of masculine protection is exemplified in Nehemiah, who organized the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls. Nehemiah 4:14 records his instructions. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. Notice the order. Remember God first, humility and dependence, then fight for others, sacrifice and service. Protection flows from worship and issues in sacrifice, not from assertion of dominance. Jesus' interaction with the woman caught in adultery provides a powerful picture of masculine protection. When religious leaders bring a woman to be stoned, Jesus doesn't respond with physical violence or aggressive confrontation. He responds with wisdom. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And then with gentle advocacy, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. He protects through moral authority, not physical dominance. This is the model ancient wisdom offers. Masculine protection is the use of whatever power, influence, or strength you possess in service of others' flourishing, particularly the vulnerable. It's not standing over people, but standing with them, not demanding submission, but offering support, not exercising dominance, but bearing burdens. While the protective role is indeed central to biblical masculinity, ancient wisdom radically defines protection as servant leadership, exemplified in Jesus' model of using strength to serve rather than dominate. In conclusion, revealing that true masculine protection flows from humility and self-sacrifice rather than superior power, and that the difference between protector and predator lies in whether a man's strength is ordered by love for others' flourishing or disordered by lust for domination and control.
Yes, and Mr. Mick, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, people, what does it mean to be a man? Recovering an ancient wisdom on masculine identity, examine how modern confusion around masculinity has distanced many men from purpose, responsibility, and meaning. In a culture that often swing between extremes, and ancient wisdom offers a balanced vision of manhood rooted in integrity, courage, service, and self mastery. So, Mr. Meg, would you like to plug in something?
I appreciate the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn, GMIC, the Dr. Digital Smith, PhD. Listen to the Dr. Digital podcast and pick up a couple volumes I have on Amazon. That's Burning America and On Track Ian Hunter.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Ming, the Dr. Digital, and please do listen to our other podcast, Music 101, and our baby podcast, Mental Health 101, wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Until next time, Deus Volt.
Mordecai people, see you soon.